Arrival shock in America. Have you ever felt tired of learning English, not because you're lazy, but because your life is already too heavy? Imagine this: you finally arrive in America, a place people call the land of opportunity, but on the first morning, you wake up and your body doesn't know what season it is, your mind doesn't know what language to think in, and your heart, honestly, your heart just wants to go home. If you've ever wanted to give up learning English, this story is for you, because I almost did too. 2 weeks ago, I landed in the United States. It wasn't my first time here, but this time felt different. The air hit my face the moment I stepped outside the airport. It was dry, sharp, and cold in a way I wasn't prepared for. Back home, the air wraps around you. Here, it cuts through you. Climate sounds like a boring topic until it messes with your body clock, your mood, and your patience. Scientists call it environmental stress. I just called it feeling grumpy for no reason. On the drive from the airport, everything felt oversized. The roads were wide. The cars were huge. Even the silence felt loud. My brain was working overtime, translating signs, listening to the radio, trying to catch words like exit, speed limit, and road work ahead. Simple English. Easy English. But when your brain is tired, even slow down feels fast. That's something people don't tell you about learning a language. Your brain learns slower when your life is unstable. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The heating system turned on and off with strange noises. The air was so dry my throat hurt. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking in Vietnamese, then suddenly switching to English for no reason. Why am I here? I asked myself. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly. That question is dangerous, by the way. Once it shows up, motivation usually packs its bags. The next morning, I went out for a walk. The sky was blue in that perfect American way, like someone edited it in Photoshop. People jogged past me with headphones on. No eye contact. No small talk. Freedom everywhere, connection nowhere. Culturally, this was my first shock. In many places, people talk to fill silence. Here, silence is respected. At first, I thought everyone was unfriendly. Later, I learned they were just minding their own business. But in that moment, my English felt useless. Who was I going to practice with? There's a psychological concept called culture shock stages. First is excitement, then confusion, then frustration. I skipped excitement and jumped straight into frustration. When you're frustrated, your brain protects itself. It avoids effort. And learning English is effort. That's why so many people stop. Not because English is hard, but because life is harder. I remember standing in a grocery store, staring at a shelf of milk. Whole milk, almond milk, oat milk, lactose-free, low-fat, Non-fat. My brain froze. A simple decision turned into a language exam. The woman next to me reached for oat milk. I wanted to ask her why. I rehearsed the sentence in my head. Excuse me, is this one good? By the time I was ready, she was gone. That's how fast opportunities disappear when you overthink in a second language. That day, I realized something important. Listening isn't just about sound. It's about emotional safety. When you feel safe, your brain opens up. When you feel stressed, it shuts down. Neuroscience backs this up. Stress hormones like cortisol literally block memory formation. So if you're learning English while feeling lost, tired, or lonely, it's not your fault that progress feels slow. In the afternoon, I sat by a window with a cup of coffee. Outside, the wind moved dry leaves across the sidewalk. I decided to do something small. I played a slow English story. Not for studying. Just for listening. No subtitles. No pressure. I didn't understand everything. But I let the sound exist. Like background music. That's when I remembered why learning English through stories works. Stories don't ask you to perform. They invite you to stay. I whispered a few sentences out loud. Simple ones. Today is cold. I feel tired. But I am here. My pronunciation wasn't perfect. My grammar wasn't fancy. But my brain relaxed. This is something language teachers rarely say. Progress begins when you stop trying to be impressive. That night, I wrote one sentence in English in my notebook. Arrival is not the hardest part. Staying is. It wasn't beautiful English. But it was honest. And honesty keeps you going longer than motivation ever will. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I'm bad at English, let me gently correct you. You're not bad at English. You're just adjusting to a new climate, a new culture, a new version of yourself. And adjustment takes time. In the next part, I'll tell you how weather changes didn't just affect my body, but quietly rewired my emotions, my marriage, and the way I started thinking in English without forcing it. Weather changes, mood changes. People talk about weather like it's small talk, like it doesn't matter. But if you've ever tried to rebuild your life, or your English, in a new country, you know weather is not background noise. It's a silent character that follows you everywhere. 2 weeks in America, I learned this the hard way. Not from books. Not from YouTube. From my own mood swinging like a badly installed door. One morning it was bright and cold. The kind of cold that looks beautiful through a window but bites the moment you step outside. My fingers stiffened. My shoulders pulled up without asking permission. Your body reacts before your brain can translate what's happening. That's important, by the way. When your body is uncomfortable, your brain spends energy on survival, not learning. That's basic neuroscience. Comfort creates capacity. Discomfort eats it. I noticed something strange. On sunny days, my English felt better. I understood more. I spoke faster. On gray days, my head felt heavy. Words disappeared. Simple sentences felt like long-distance running. This isn't imagination. Studies show sunlight affects serotonin levels, which directly influence mood and cognitive flexibility. In plain language, less light, slower thinking. And when you're learning a language, slower thinking feels like failure. One afternoon, rain started without warning. Not the warm, dramatic rain I was used to, but cold, sharp drops pushed sideways by wind. I stood under a small store awning, watching people walk past calmly, like this weather was normal. To them, it was. To me, it felt personal. That's another thing weather does. It makes you feel targeted when you're already sensitive. My phone buzzed. A message from my partner. Simple English. Practical. Don't forget the heater tonight. I stared at that sentence longer than necessary. Not because it was hard, but because my emotions were loud. When emotions are loud, language becomes quiet. Psychologists call this emotional interference. I call it your feelings stealing your vocabulary. At home, the heater hummed softly. The air dried out my skin. My lips cracked. Small discomforts piled up like unpaid bills. I tried to practice English the right way. Vocabulary lists. Grammar exercises. My brain resisted like a stubborn child. So I stopped. I did something different. I described the weather out loud. Slowly. Honestly. It is cold. Pause. The air is dry. Pause. I miss warm rain. No correction. No pressure. Just observation. Here's something counterintuitive. Describing your environment trains your brain to connect language with reality, not fear. Language stops being a test and starts being a tool. Linguists call this embodied learning. Your body experiences something, and your language grows around it. That's how children learn. That's how you learned your first language. Somewhere along the way, we forgot. As days passed, I noticed patterns. Cold mornings made me quiet. Warm afternoons made me talkative. Wind made me impatient. Rain made me nostalgic. Instead of fighting these moods, I started naming them, in English. Today I feel slow. The weather makes me tired. These sentences weren't poetic, but they were powerful. They gave shape to feelings that used to block my mouth. My partner noticed the change before I did. "You sound calmer," they said one evening. Not better. Not fluent. Just calmer. That mattered. Calm is the doorway. When you're calm, you listen. When you listen, you learn. That's true in language. It's also true in relationships. Culturally, weather in America isn't just weather. It shapes lifestyle. People plan everything around it. Driving instead of walking. Staying indoors longer. Scheduling life weeks ahead. At first, this felt cold, emotionally, not just physically. Where I came from, weather was something you adapted to together. Here, you adapt individually. Freedom, yes. But also distance. That distance crept into my marriage quietly. Less talking. More scrolling. More silence. And silence, when you're learning English, can feel like punishment. I wanted to speak, but I didn't want to sound wrong. My brain did a cost-benefit analysis and decided silence was cheaper. One night, during a storm, the power flickered. The house went quiet. No heater. No internet. Just rain hitting the windows like fingers tapping impatiently. We sat together on the couch. I said slowly, "This weather is heavy." Not perfect English, but true. My partner nodded. Yeah. It feels long. That was it. No deep talk. No big lesson. But something shifted. Language didn't have to be perfect to be shared. Science supports this moment more than romance does. Shared experiences synchronize nervous systems. When two people experience the same stressor, like weather, their brains align emotionally. Communication becomes easier. Not because language improves, but because pressure drops. That's why learning English through real life beats memorizing phrases you never feel. I started using weather as my daily English teacher. Morning forecast. Listening practice. Temperature changes. Speaking prompts. Today is colder than yesterday. Simple. Repetitive. Real. My brain liked that. Repetition without boredom is the secret sauce of language learning. Weather repeats, but never exactly the same. By the end of the second week, something surprised me. I wasn't thinking, "How do I say this?" as often. I was thinking, "How do I feel?" And English followed. Not fast. Not perfectly. But steadily. Like seasons changing without asking permission. If you're struggling to learn English, look outside. Seriously. Describe what you see. What you feel. What the air does to your skin. Language grows where attention goes. And attention is easier when it's anchored to something real. Weather didn't just change my mood. It taught me a quieter way to learn. One that doesn't fight my brain, my body, or my heart. And that lesson mattered more than any textbook ever did. Lonely freedom. Freedom sounds beautiful until you live inside it. That was my first real lesson in America. You imagine freedom as open roads, endless choices, and nobody telling you what to do. And yes, that part is real. But there's another side people don't post about. Freedom here is quiet. Too quiet. And when you're learning English, silence can feel like a locked door with no handle. In the first few days, I noticed how alone everyone looked, by choice. People ate alone, walked alone, thought alone. Nobody asked where you were going or when you'd be back. At first, that felt respectful. Then it felt empty. Back home, someone always interrupts you. Here, nobody does. Your time is yours. Your problems are also yours. This kind of freedom messes with your brain in subtle ways. Psychologists call it decision fatigue. When everything is a choice, your mind gets tired faster. What to eat, where to go, when to speak. Even whether to practice English becomes optional. And optional things are the first to disappear when energy runs low. I remember sitting in a cafe, laptop open, English audio playing quietly. Perfect setup. This was the dream, right? Freedom to learn anywhere. But my eyes kept drifting to the window. People came in, ordered, left. Minimal words. Efficient. I realized something uncomfortable. Nobody needed my English. Nobody waited for me to speak. If I stayed silent, life continued just fine. That realization hit harder than any grammar mistake. When language isn't required for survival, motivation has to come from somewhere deeper. And deeper is harder to access when you're alone. There's a concept in neuroscience called social scaffolding. Basically, humans learn better when other humans are involved. Even passive presence helps. When that scaffolding disappears, your brain feels like it's free climbing without ropes. Possible, yes. Comfortable? Not at all. Freedom in America gave me space. But space amplifies whatever you bring into it. Confidence grows. Doubt also grows. One afternoon, I tried to start a conversation with a cashier. Simple stuff. How's your day? They answered politely. Quickly. Transaction complete. No follow-up. I walked out feeling stupid for expecting more. That's when I realized I wasn't missing English. I was missing feedback. Feedback is oxygen for language learning. Without it, your brain doesn't know if it's doing okay. So it chooses the safest option. Say nothing. Silence becomes your default setting. And the more you stay silent, the harder speaking feels. It's a loop. A quiet one. Dangerous because it looks peaceful from the outside. At home, that silence followed me into my relationship. We weren't fighting. We weren't unhappy. We were separate. Two people exercising freedom in parallel lines. That's when I started to wonder, can love survive this much independence? Can language? One night, I tried to explain this feeling. Slowly. carefully. I feel free, I said. Pause. But also alone. My partner nodded. No fixing. No advice. Just listening. That moment mattered more than fluency. Because being heard makes you braver. Bravery invites words. Science backs this up. Feeling socially supported reduces activity in the brain's threat system. Less threat means easier access to language centers. In simple terms, when you feel emotionally safe, English comes out with less resistance. Safety is the real fluency hack nobody talks about. I stopped forcing conversation with strangers. Instead, I started narrating my freedom, out loud, to myself, while walking, while cooking. I can go anywhere. I choose to stay. I don't have to speak, but I want to. These sentences weren't practice. They were permission. That shift changed everything. English stopped being a requirement and became a companion. Something I carried, not something I chased. Freedom gave me time. I used it to listen, to podcasts, to street sounds, to my own thoughts forming in a second language. Listening without pressure is powerful. Your brain absorbs patterns quietly, like rain soaking into dry ground. There's a strange paradox here. Too much freedom can kill discipline. But used gently, freedom can rebuild trust with yourself. I made one rule, one honest English sentence a day. Not impressive. Not correct. Honest. Some days it was, I don't want to talk today. That still counted. Over time, those sentences stacked up. My mouth stopped freezing. My ears stopped panicking. English didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like a mirror. Slightly blurry, yes, but still mine. Freedom also taught me something about marriage. Love here isn't glued together by obligation. It survives on choice. Daily choice. And choice requires communication. Even broken English beats perfect silence. That realization didn't save everything instantly, but it gave us direction. If you're learning English and feeling stuck, ask yourself this: are you overwhelmed by freedom? Too many resources. Too many methods. Too many expectations. Maybe what you need isn't more structure, but one small anchor. One sentence. One story. One voice you trust. Freedom doesn't automatically make you fluent. It tests whether you'll show up when nobody is watching. And that test is uncomfortable. But it's also where real growth hides. In the next part, I'll tell you how love enters this quiet freedom, and why romance without scripts is both terrifying and exactly what forced my English to finally breathe. Love without scripts. Nobody tells you this part about love in America. There is no script. No fixed timeline. No clear rules that say, at this point, you should feel this way. When I stepped into a relationship here, I kept waiting for cues, signals that never came. And strangely, that uncertainty did more for my English than any classroom ever did. Back home, love stories follow patterns. You meet, you date, you struggle, you commit. Even the struggles feel familiar. But here, love looks like freedom wearing a soft disguise. You're allowed to be yourself. Fully. And that sounds romantic until you realize being yourself requires words. A lot of them. Honest ones. In English. At first, I thought love would help my language automatically. Movies taught me that. You fall in love, you talk all night, language magically improves. Reality was quieter. My partner didn't fill silences for me. They waited. Not out of cruelty, but respect. In that waiting, my brain panicked. Silence stretched. I could feel sentences forming and collapsing before reaching my mouth. This is where scripts matter. Scripts give your brain shortcuts. Without them, your brain has to work harder. Cognitive scientists call this increased cognitive load. I called it exhausting. Imagine trying to dance without knowing the steps while everyone else hears music you don't fully recognize. That was love. That was English. One evening, we sat across from each other after dinner. No phones. No TV. Just quiet. My partner asked a simple question. How are you feeling about us? Simple English. Heavy meaning. My mind raced. I searched for the correct answer instead of the true one. That pause, too long, wasn't about vocabulary. It was about fear. Fear of sounding wrong. Fear of being misunderstood. So I did something new. I spoke slowly. Not fluently. Slowly. I like the freedom, I said. Pause. But sometimes I feel lost. That was it. No metaphors. No fancy grammar. My voice shook slightly. But something clicked. The room felt warmer. Not because my English improved, but because honesty reduced pressure. Psychology explains this beautifully. When people drop performance mode, the brain's threat response lowers. Less threat means better access to language. In simple terms, when you stop trying to impress, your words stop hiding. Love without scripts forces that shift. There's nowhere to hide behind memorized phrases. I noticed something else. Arguments here sounded different. Not louder. Slower. People explain feelings instead of throwing accusations. That requires emotional vocabulary. Not advanced words, basic ones used precisely. I feel ignored. I need space. I'm confused. These sentences became my real English lessons. Repeated. Contextual. Emotional. At first, I copied my partner. Not the words, but the rhythm. short sentences, clear pauses, eye contact. Linguists call this mirroring. It's how humans naturally align communication styles. Without realizing it, my English picked up the same calm tone. Love became my pronunciation coach. But it wasn't romantic all the time. There were moments when freedom hurt. When my partner chose personal time over together time. In my old mindset, that felt like rejection. In this culture, it meant trust. Understanding that difference required language. Not just English words, but cultural translation. One afternoon I said, "I don't know how to love here." My partner smiled gently. "We learn," they said. That sentence stayed with me. Love here is learned, not assumed. And learning requires patience. The same patience you need for English. Science supports this overlap. Emotional learning and language learning activate overlapping neural networks. That's why emotional experiences accelerate language acquisition. Your brain remembers what mattered. Love matters. So the words stick. I started journaling short reflections in English about the relationship. Not daily essays. Just moments. Today, we disagreed calmly. Today, silence was okay. These sentences weren't for sharing. They were for grounding. Writing slowed my thoughts enough for English to catch up. Gradually, I stopped translating from my first language. Feelings appeared directly in English, simple, imperfect, but immediate. That's when I realized something important. Scripts delay presence. Without scripts, you're forced into the moment. Presence makes language real. Love without scripts also challenged my expectations of marriage. There was no happily ever after tone. No promise that things would be easy. Just a mutual decision to keep talking. Keep listening. Keep choosing. And choosing requires language. Daily. Sometimes clumsy. Sometimes tired. If you're learning English and waiting to feel ready before speaking about real emotions, love will ruin that plan. In the best way. It doesn't wait for fluency. It demands sincerity. And sincerity uses whatever language you have. By the end of that week, I noticed something subtle. I wasn't afraid of saying the wrong thing anymore. I was more afraid of saying nothing. That shift changed everything. English stopped being a wall. It became a bridge, narrow, shaky, but passable. Love here didn't give me a fairy tale. It gave me practice. Real, emotional, unavoidable practice. And in that unscripted space, my English finally started to sound like me. In the next part, I'll tell you how marriage turned this unscripted love into a reality check, and why real-life commitments forced my English to grow up fast. Marriage reality check. Marriage has a funny way of removing illusions quietly. No dramatic music. No warning sign. Just one ordinary day when you realize love is no longer just an emotion, it's a system. And in America, that system runs on communication, clarity, and paperwork. A lot of paperwork. That's when my English got a reality check it didn't ask for. Before marriage, English was flexible, romantic, forgiving. If I said something wrong, it was cute. After marriage, English became functional, precise, slightly unforgiving. Bills don't care about your accent. Policies don't wait for you to find the right word. Marriage introduced me to a version of English that lives outside feelings. I remember the first conversation about finances. Not emotional. Not angry. Just serious. Numbers on the table. Responsibilities clearly divided. My partner spoke calmly, slowly, like explaining something important to a child, not because they saw me as one, but because clarity mattered. My brain struggled. Not with vocabulary, but with the weight of it all. Marriage turned English into a tool for survival, not expression. There's a psychological reason this feels heavy. Marriage increases cognitive load. More decisions. More consequences. Your brain has less space for language experimentation. That's why many people feel their English gets worse when life gets busier. It's not regression. It's bandwidth. Then there were policies. Health insurance. Taxes. Housing rules. In America, marriage is not just emotional, it's legal. Every form felt like a reading test designed by someone who hates joy. I read sentences 3 times. Joint liability. Beneficiary. Deductible. Words that never appear in love stories but dominate married life. One afternoon, we sat at the table filling out documents. I misread a question. My partner corrected me gently. I snapped. Not loudly. Just emotionally. "This is too much English," I said. Half joking. Half exhausted. That was the moment I realized marriage exposes your weakest language habits. Stress removes your safety net. Neuroscience explains this well. Under stress, the brain prioritizes efficiency over learning. That's why your English feels clumsy during serious conversations. Marriage brings seriousness into everyday life. Suddenly, English isn't optional practice, it's infrastructure. Culturally, this hit me hard. Where I come from, many things in marriage are assumed. Roles are implied. In America, assumptions are dangerous. Everything must be spoken, agreed upon, revisited. That means more talking, not less. Silence doesn't mean peace here, it means unresolved. I learned this during a small argument about chores. Nothing dramatic. Just different expectations. In my head, this was obvious. In my partner's world, It needed words. Clear ones. I need help with this. I feel overwhelmed. These weren't advanced sentences, but saying them required courage. Marriage forced me to stop hiding behind "it's fine." Language learning research shows that meaningful repetition accelerates fluency. Marriage is repetition. Same topics. Same discussions. Over and over. Finance. Time. Energy. Feelings. Each time, your English improves slightly, not because you study harder, but because the stakes are real. I started noticing patterns in my mistakes. I avoided emotional words. I defaulted to logic. That wasn't an English problem. It was a vulnerability problem. Marriage doesn't let you outsource vulnerability. And vulnerability is where real language lives. One night, after a long day, I said something simple. I don't know how to say this well, but I feel pressure. My partner didn't correct my grammar. They leaned closer. That response taught me more than any correction ever could. Meaning landed even when form wasn't perfect. Science backs this up too. Emotional relevance increases memory retention. Your brain remembers words used during emotionally significant moments more easily. That's why marriage became my most intense English classroom. No vitevoard. No syllabus. Just life happening repeatedly until my language caught up. I also realized something uncomfortable. Marriage in America values independence inside commitment. You're together, but still responsible for yourself. That requires negotiation. Negotiation requires language. Clear boundaries. Clear requests. Clear listening. English stopped being about sounding smart and started being about being understood. Slowly, my mindset changed. I stopped aiming for fluency and aimed for clarity. Short sentences. Honest words. Pauses. Marriage taught me that pausing is not weakness. It's respect. Respect for meaning. If you're learning English and planning a future that includes partnership or marriage, here's the truth nobody tells you. Your language doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be usable. Life doesn't wait for fluency. It meets you where you are. Marriage isn't a fairy tale. It's a daily negotiation between two imperfect humans using imperfect language to build something stable. And stability, ironically, gave my English something it needed desperately: context. In the next part, I'll tell you how arguments, yes, arguments, became my most unexpected English teacher, and why emotional conflict forced my listening and speaking skills to level up fast. English in arguments. Nobody tells you this when you start learning English. Arguments will teach you faster than textbooks. Not because conflict is good, but because emotion removes your hiding places. In marriage, especially in a foreign country, arguments don't ask whether your grammar is ready. They show up, knock once, and start talking. Our first real argument in America wasn't loud. It was slow, almost polite. That made it worse. When voices are calm, words matter more. There's no emotional noise to hide behind. Every sentence lands exactly as spoken. And when you're using English as a second language, that's terrifying. It started with something small. Timing. A missed expectation. I said, "I thought you understood." My partner replied, "I didn't. You didn't say it." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Because it was true. I assumed understanding without language. Marriage here doesn't reward assumptions. It exposes them. My brain did what it always does under stress. It simplified. Vocabulary disappeared. Complex ideas shrank into short, blunt sentences. Neuroscience explains this. Under emotional pressure, the brain shifts control from the prefrontal cortex to more primitive systems. Translation: your English gets basic because your brain is busy protecting you. At first, I hated that feeling. I sounded childish, incomplete. But something interesting happened. My listening improved. When you argue in a second language, you listen with your whole body. Tone. Pauses. Breathing. You stop waiting for your turn to speak and start decoding meaning. That's advanced listening, whether you like it or not. There's a concept in linguistics called negotiation of meaning. It happens when people clarify, rephrase, and check understanding during communication breakdowns. Arguments are full of this. That's not what I meant. Let me try again. Do you mean this or that? These moments are gold for language learning. Painful, but effective. One night, in the middle of an argument, I said, "I feel small when you decide alone." Not perfect English, but accurate. My partner paused. "I didn't know you felt that way," they said. That pause mattered. It showed me that emotional clarity beats grammatical accuracy every time. Culturally, I noticed another difference. In many places, arguments aim to win. Here, they aim to resolve. That doesn't make them easier. It makes them longer. Resolution requires explanation. Explanation requires language. You can't escape with silence. Silence looks like avoidance. I wanted to retreat, to shut down. But marriage doesn't allow disappearing acts. So I slowed down. I spoke in fragments. I need time. I'm overwhelmed. Please wait. These weren't elegant sentences. They were survival tools. And tools don't need to be pretty. They need to work. Psychologists talk about repair attempts in relationships, small efforts to reconnect during conflict. Language is the primary repair tool. When you say, "I'm trying to explain," you're not just communicating. You're asking for patience. And patience creates space for learning. I started preparing emotionally, not linguistically. Before difficult conversations, I took deep breaths. That sounds basic, but it matters. Breathing regulates your nervous system. A regulated nervous system gives your brain access to language. This isn't motivational advice. It's biology. Over time, arguments became less scary. Not because they disappeared, but because I trusted my English to carry enough meaning. I learned key phrases that mattered more than fancy words. Help me understand. That's not my intention. Can we slow down? These sentences became anchors. Repeated. Refined. Owned. Listening changed too. I stopped translating word by word. I listened for intention, emotion, direction. That's real comprehension. Textbooks teach structure. Arguments teach relevance. Your brain prioritizes what affects your relationship. That's why these lessons stick. One surprising thing happened. My accent softened, not because I practiced pronunciation, but because I spoke from my chest instead of my head. Emotion naturally smooths rhythm. When you care about meaning, your speech becomes more fluid. This is something phonetics experts talk about. Prosody improves with emotional engagement. Arguments also taught me humility. I didn't always understand. Sometimes I asked for repetition. Sometimes I got it wrong. And the world didn't end. That reduced my fear of making mistakes in everyday English too. If I could survive an argument, I could survive ordering food. Marriage turned conflict into collaboration. We weren't fighting to win. We were fighting to understand. That shift transformed English from a weapon into a bridge. A shaky bridge at times, but still a bridge. If you're avoiding speaking English because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, remember this: silence also says something. Often something you don't mean. Words, even broken ones, give you a chance to be seen accurately. Arguments are uncomfortable classrooms. But they teach listening, clarity, and emotional timing faster than any course. They force you to use English the way it's meant to be used, not to impress, but to connect. In the next part, I'll talk about cultural misunderstandings, how everyday habits, family expectations, and unspoken rules created confusion, and how those moments quietly shaped both my marriage and my English. Cultural misunderstandings. Cultural misunderstandings don't announce themselves. They don't say, "This is a cultural difference." They arrive disguised as confusion, awkward pauses, or that strange feeling that something is off but you can't explain why. In America, I learned quickly that most misunderstandings weren't caused by bad intentions or bad English. They were caused by invisible rules nobody thinks to explain. The first time I noticed it was during a family gathering. Nothing dramatic. Just a room full of people, food on the table, conversations floating in different directions. Back home, gatherings are loud, overlapping, emotionally close. Here, people spoke in turns. They left space. Too much space, I thought. I waited for the right moment to jump in. The moment never came. By the time I spoke, the topic had moved on. That silence wasn't language failure. It was cultural timing. American conversations value clarity over overlap. You wait. You take turns. If you interrupt, even politely, it can feel intrusive. Nobody explained that. I learned it by watching my words land slightly late, like a train missing the platform. My English wasn't wrong. My rhythm was. Psychologists call this pragmatic competence. Knowing how to use language appropriately in a social context. It's the hardest part of language learning because it's rarely taught. Textbooks don't tell you when silence means respect and when it means distance. Another misunderstanding showed up in daily routines. Personal space. Privacy. Independence. In my culture, checking in often means care. Here, it can mean pressure. I asked questions that felt normal to me. Where are you going? When will you be back? My partner didn't get angry, but they stiffened slightly. That reaction taught me more than words could. Later, we talked about it. Slowly. Carefully. Here, my partner said, those questions can feel controlling. That sentence stopped me. Not because I disagreed, but because I realized something important. Meaning changes across cultures even when words stay the same. Language learners often blame themselves when misunderstandings happen. But culture carries half the message. Linguists say communication is only about 30% words. The rest is context, tone, expectation. That means you can be fluent and still misunderstood, or basic and deeply understood. Family dynamics revealed another layer. In American families, emotional independence starts early. Children are encouraged to speak up, decide, negotiate. That was new to me. Watching parents discuss choices with their kids felt strange. Respect here looks different. Less hierarchical. More conversational. At first, this confused me. I mistook openness for lack of structure. But over time, I saw the pattern. Dialogue is the structure. And dialogue requires language. Calm, patient, repetitive language. No shouting. No guessing. Just saying what you mean. This affected my marriage more than I expected. I was waiting for cues that never came. Waiting for my partner to just know. In this culture, knowing comes from talking. Silence isn't romantic. It's ambiguous. And ambiguity creates distance. One evening, after a misunderstanding about weekend plans, I said, "I thought you knew." My partner replied gently, "Here, we don't assume. We ask." That sentence felt like a cultural headline. Clear, simple, slightly uncomfortable. From a learning perspective, this was gold. Asking questions forces you to speak. Clarifying forces you to listen. Cultural misunderstandings created repeated opportunities to practice both. Emotionally loaded, yes, but incredibly effective. I started changing my habits. I asked directly, "What do you expect? How do you feel about this?" At first, my English sounded stiff, too direct. But clarity is valued here. Directness isn't rude when it's calm. That was a hard adjustment, but a necessary one. There's research showing that adults learn language faster when feedback is immediate and meaningful. Cultural misunderstandings deliver both. You say something. You see the reaction. You adjust. It's uncomfortable, but your brain remembers the correction. I also learned to explain my own culture in English. That was harder than explaining America. In my culture, asking means caring, I said once. That sentence mattered. It gave context to my words. It reduced friction. It turned misunderstanding into mutual learning. Over time, misunderstandings became less frequent. Not because differences disappeared, but because we named them. Naming creates shared language. Shared language creates safety. Safety improves fluency. I noticed my listening skills sharpen. I paid attention to pauses, facial expressions, tone shifts. Cultural learning trains your ears, not just your vocabulary. That's why immersion works, when you survive it long enough. If you're learning English and feeling confused by people's reactions, pause before blaming your grammar. Ask yourself, could this be cultural? Often, the answer is yes. And that's not failure. That's progress. Cultural misunderstandings taught me patience, with myself, with my partner, with the process. They showed me that learning English isn't about becoming American. It's about becoming understandable without losing yourself. In the next part, I'll share the moment when all these pressures, language, culture, marriage, piled up so heavily that I almost gave up entirely, and what pulled me back when quitting felt like the easiest option. Almost giving up. There's a moment nobody prepares you for. The quiet one where you don't feel dramatic enough to cry, but too tired to keep going. That was the moment I almost gave up. Not just on English. On the whole idea that effort would eventually make things easier. 2 weeks in America, with marriage pressures, cultural confusion, and a second language living rent-free in my head, quitting felt logical. Peaceful, even. It didn't happen after a big fight or a clear failure. It happened on an ordinary morning. Gray sky. Cold floor. My phone buzzed with reminders, bills, emails, responsibilities, all in English. I stared at the screen and felt my chest tighten. My brain whispered a dangerous sentence, "You don't have to do this." And the scariest part? That sentence sounded kind. Psychologists call this burnout's cousin, learned helplessness. When effort doesn't immediately pay off, your brain concludes that effort is pointless. It's not laziness. It's self-protection. Your nervous system is trying to save energy by shutting down optional tasks. And learning English, when life is heavy, feels optional. I sat at the table with a notebook open and nothing written. Usually, I'd force myself to write something. Anything. That day, I didn't. I closed the notebook and felt relief. Immediate relief. That's how you know quitting is tempting. It gives you comfort up front and charges interest later. My partner noticed. Not with questions. With silence. A careful kind. That silence made me feel worse, not better. I interpreted it as disappointment, even though it wasn't. This is what emotional exhaustion does. It rewrites neutral signals into negative stories. And once those stories take over, language disappears. You stop explaining. You stop asking. You stop trying. Science explains this spiral well. Under chronic stress, the brain's motivation circuitry weakens. Dopamine drops. Tasks that require sustained attention, like listening to English, feel heavier than they are. That's why burnout doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like numbness. I remember thinking, maybe I'm just not made for this. That thought is seductive because it removes responsibility. If it's who you are, not what you're doing, then stopping makes sense. But identity-based quitting is the hardest to come back from. That afternoon, I went for a walk. No podcast. No learning plan. Just movement. Cold air in my lungs. I passed families, couples, people living lives that looked stable and distant. I felt like an outsider watching through glass. That's when another thought showed up. Even if I quit English, my life here won't get simpler. That thought hurt, but it was honest. Quitting English wouldn't remove forms, conversations, or misunderstandings. It would only remove my ability to participate. That realization didn't motivate me. It grounded me. There's a difference. When I got home, I didn't open a textbook. I opened a voice recorder. I said one sentence, "Today I don't want to learn." I stopped. That was it. No correction. No improvement goal. Just truth recorded in English. Oddly, saying it out loud loosened something in my chest. Therapists talk about emotional labeling. Naming feelings reduces their intensity. When you label in the language you're learning, something extra happens. The language becomes a container for emotion instead of a battlefield. English stopped attacking me and started holding me. That evening, my partner asked, "Do you want to talk?" I answered honestly. Not really. But I don't want to disappear. That sentence took effort. But it landed. And landing matters more than elegance. We didn't solve anything that night. We didn't make plans or promises. We sat together quietly. That shared silence felt different from the lonely kind. It had choice in it. And choice is the opposite of helplessness. I realized then that giving up wasn't about English being too hard. It was about carrying too much alone. Language learning advice often ignores this. It tells you to push harder, be consistent, stay disciplined. But discipline without support becomes punishment. Research shows that persistence improves when goals shrink. Microactions rebuild trust with yourself. So I made a deal, not with English, but with my nervous system. One small action a day that didn't hurt. One sentence. 1 minute. No evaluation. The next morning, I described the weather again. It's gray, but quiet. That was enough. The day after, I listened to a slow story while washing dishes. Half attention. That was enough. Momentum returned, not with excitement, but with tolerance. And tolerance grows into capability. I didn't stop wanting to quit immediately. The thought still visited. But it didn't stay as long. Each small action weakened its authority. That's how recovery actually works. Not with motivation speeches, but with boring consistency that respects your limits. If you're listening to this and thinking about giving up, on English, on a dream, on yourself, pause. Ask a gentler question. Not how do I push through? But what can I do without hurting myself today? The answer might be smaller than you expect. That's okay. Giving up felt close because I was close to changing, not because I was failing. Pressure often peaks right before adjustment. I didn't know that then. I know it now. In the next part, I'll share the small language habits that quietly pulled me back. Habits backed by science, built into daily life, and gentle enough to survive marriage, culture shock, and bad weather. Small language habits. Big changes didn't save my English. Small habits did. Not the kind you post online or feel proud of, but the quiet ones that slip into your day without asking for motivation. After almost giving up, I realized something simple. My brain didn't need inspiration. It needed predictability, safety, and habits small enough to survive bad days. I stopped asking, how can I improve my English? That question was too heavy. Instead, I asked, what English can fit into my life today? That shift changed everything. Psychology calls this lowering activation energy. If a task feels easy to start, you're more likely to do it. Language learning fails when the starting point feels like a mountain. The first habit was listening without focus. I played slow English stories while doing something else. Washing dishes, folding laundry, walking.
No pausing. No repeating.
No pressure to understand. Neuroscience supports this approach. Your auditory system learns patterns even when your attention drifts. That's how you learned your first language, surrounded by sound, not instructions. The second habit was speaking without audience. I talk to myself. A lot. Not motivational speeches. Narration.
I'm cutting vegetables.
This knife is dull. I should buy a new one. Simple sentences tied to physical action. Linguists call this situated speech. Your brain links language to movement, making recall easier later. At first, I felt ridiculous. Then I felt free. There was no one to impress. No one to judge. Just my voice and the moment. That safety made my sentences longer, more natural. Speaking alone removed performance anxiety, which research shows is one of the biggest barriers to adult language learning. The third habit was one honest sentence a day, written or spoken. Not positive. Not productive. Honest. Today I feel tired. I miss home. I'm proud I didn't quit. Emotional honesty activates memory pathways more strongly than neutral statements. The brain remembers what matters. Marriage actually helped this habit. Shared routines created repeated contexts. Morning coffee. Evening check-ins. Instead of avoiding English during these moments, I claimed them. Short phrases.
Familiar vocabulary.
Same time, same place. Repetition without boredom is the secret sauce of fluency. I also stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. That was huge. Self-correction breaks flow and trains your brain to associate speaking with interruption. Fluency experts recommend finishing the thought first, correcting later, if at all. Meaning before form. Always. Another small habit surprised me, describing feelings instead of events. Events are complex. Feelings are basic.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm calm. I'm confused.
These words came up daily in marriage, culture shock, and life. Repeating them built emotional vocabulary, the kind that actually gets used. Science backs this up. Emotional vocabulary improves communication accuracy and reduces conflict. It also increases confidence. When you can name how you feel, you don't panic as much about how you sound. I limited my input to fewer resources, same voice, same speed. Consistency matters more than variety at this stage. The brain learns faster when patterns repeat. Jumping between accents and styles slowed me down. I chose one slow storyteller and stayed. One habit broke a common rule. I allowed boredom. Not every session had to feel productive. Sometimes I listened and understood nothing. That was okay. Language acquisition isn't linear. It's cumulative. Your brain stacks exposure quietly, then surprises you later. I noticed progress in unexpected moments. Ordering food felt easier. Arguments felt clearer. Silence felt less threatening. English didn't suddenly become fluent, it became available. That's the real milestone. The most important habit wasn't linguistic. It was self-talk. I stopped saying, "I'm bad at English." I replaced it with, "My English is tired today." That subtle change removed identity from struggle. Skills fluctuate. Identities don't have to. If you're overwhelmed, don't redesign your whole routine. Add one tiny habit that respects your life. Language should fit into your marriage, your stress, your weather, not fight them. Small habits saved my English because they didn't demand belief. They only asked for presence. And presence is something you can offer even on your worst days. In the next part, I'll show you how these habits didn't just improve my English. They changed how my partner and I listened to each other, and how love itself learned to slow down and hear. Love learns to listen. Listening is the skill nobody celebrates until it saves something important. I used to think listening meant staying quiet while waiting for my turn to talk. Marriage in America corrected that misunderstanding quickly. Real listening isn't passive. It's active, uncomfortable, and, when you're learning English, exhausting in the best possible way. After building those small language habits, something subtle changed between my partner and me. Our conversations slowed down. Not because we had less to say, but because we stopped racing toward conclusions. I wasn't just hearing English sounds anymore. I was tracking intention, emotion, what was underneath the words. That shift didn't come from studying. It came from choosing to listen even when my brain wanted to escape. One evening my partner said, "I feel distant lately." Old me would have panicked, searched for the right response, or defended myself. New me did something radical. I asked one sentence, "Can you tell me more?" Simple English. Huge impact. That question buys time. It signals safety. Therapists use it for a reason. When people feel heard, they soften. When they soften, language flows. Listening in a second language requires humility. You don't catch everything. You miss jokes. You misread tone. At first, I tried to hide that. Now, I name it. I might misunderstand. Can you explain? That sentence changed our dynamic. Asking for clarification isn't weakness. It's respect. And respect turns conversations into collaborations. There's solid science behind this. Active listening reduces defensive responses in the brain. When defenses drop, comprehension improves. It's a loop that feeds itself. The calmer you are, the better you understand. The better you understand, the calmer you become. Love benefits. Language benefits. I noticed that my listening improved fastest during emotionally neutral moments, planning dinner, talking about schedules, sharing observations about the day. These moments are repetitive. Repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity lowers anxiety. Anxiety is the real enemy of listening, not vocabulary gaps. I also learned to listen with my eyes. Facial expressions. Micropauses. Breathing changes. Nonverbal cues carry meaning when words fall short. In marriage, this matters. In language learning, it's a cheat code. Communication experts estimate that a large portion of meaning comes from nonverbal signals. When your vocabulary is limited, your attention compensates. One mistake I made early on was multitasking while listening. Phone in hand. Mind half elsewhere. That destroyed comprehension. So I created a small rule: important conversations deserve full attention. No scrolling. No rehearsing responses. Just presence. Presence is magnetic. It pulls language toward you. Slow listening became our shared pace. My partner adjusted too: shorter sentences, clearer pauses, checking in. This wasn't dumbing down. It was meeting in the middle. Relationships thrive when both sides adapt. Language learning accelerates the same way. There's a technique linguists call reflective listening. You repeat back what you heard to confirm understanding. I started using it in English. So you're saying you felt ignored when I didn't respond? It felt awkward at first. Then it felt powerful. Misunderstandings decreased. Trust increased. And my sentence structure improved naturally through repetition. Listening also taught me when not to speak. Silence became intentional instead of fearful. Sometimes, listening means letting space exist. In American culture, pauses aren't always uncomfortable. They signal thinking. Respecting that pause stopped me from rushing my English and tripping over half-formed thoughts. Emotionally, something shifted. I felt less pressure to perform. When listening becomes the goal, speaking follows more easily. You respond instead of produce. Responses are grounded. Production is stressful. That's a key difference language learners often miss. I started applying this listening mindset beyond marriage. At stores. At appointments. On the phone. I listened for keywords, not perfection. Dates. Amounts. Requests. Function over form. That's how real-world listening works. Nobody needs you to understand everything, just enough to act appropriately. Over time, my partner noticed. "You're really listening," they said one night. That comment mattered more than any compliment about my English. Because listening is love in action. It says, You matter enough for me to slow down. Research on couples supports this. Feeling heard predicts relationship satisfaction more strongly than problem-solving ability. Language learning rides on the same track. When you prioritize understanding over correctness, progress accelerates. If you're learning English, try this experiment. For one day, don't aim to speak better. Aim to listen better. Ask clarifying questions. Reflect back. Notice tone. You'll be surprised how much English shows up naturally when the pressure to perform disappears. Love didn't teach me to talk more. It taught me to listen deeper. And in that depth, English finally found room to breathe. Words came slower, but truer. Fewer, but stronger. In the next part, I'll share the realization that tied everything together. How freedom and commitment stopped fighting each other, and how understanding that balance changed both my marriage and my English for good. Freedom with commitment. For a long time, I believed freedom and commitment were opposites. Freedom meant choice. Commitment meant limitation. That belief followed me to America like an invisible suitcase, heavy and rarely opened. Marriage forced me to unpack it. Slowly. Uncomfortably. And in that process, my English changed in ways I didn't expect. In the beginning, freedom felt fragile. I could do anything, but nothing anchored me. My days were flexible, my schedule open, my identity blurry. Commitment arrived like a structure I wasn't sure I wanted. Suddenly, decisions mattered more. Words mattered more. Saying yes meant saying no to something else. That terrified me, not emotionally, but linguistically. Commitment requires explanation. Freedom can hide in silence. American culture frames freedom as personal responsibility. You choose, and you own the outcome. Marriage doesn't remove that freedom. It sharpens it. You're still free, but now your choices affect someone else. That realization forced me to communicate more clearly than ever before. Vague English wasn't enough. I had to say what I meant. At first, this felt like pressure. Why couldn't things just flow? Why did we have to talk about everything? Plans, boundaries, expectations. I missed the comfort of implied understanding. But implied understanding is a luxury of shared culture. In a mixed cultural marriage, implication is risky. Language becomes the bridge, or the wall. Psychologically, this is where many people freeze. Commitment activates fear of loss of freedom, identity, control. When fear shows up, language shuts down. The brain avoids clarity because clarity feels final. But avoiding clarity creates tension. Tension leaks into tone, silence, and misunderstanding. I felt this during a simple conversation about future plans. My partner asked, "What do you want to build here?" My first instinct was to deflect, joke, change the topic. That's freedom's defense mechanism. But marriage doesn't reward avoidance. So I answered slowly. I want stability, I said. Pause. And space to grow. Not poetic, but accurate. Something unexpected happened. Saying it out loud didn't trap me. It grounded me. Commitment, I realized, isn't a cage. It's a container. Containers don't limit growth. They shape it. And shaped growth is easier to express than endless possibility. Language learning theory supports this. Constraints actually improve fluency. When your options are limited, your brain focuses. That's why beginners speak faster than intermediate learners. They have fewer choices. Commitment reduced my linguistic overwhelm. I didn't need perfect English for infinite futures. I needed usable English for shared decisions. Marriage gave my English a purpose beyond survival. It became a tool for building, not just navigating. Conversations shifted from "what do I feel?" to "what do we decide?" That "we" matters. It changes pronouns. It changes tone. It changes responsibility. I noticed my sentences became more direct, less apologetic, not aggressive, clear. I need time. I can't do that today. Let's decide together. These phrases are commitment language. They require honesty. And honesty simplifies English. You stop hiding behind complexity. Freedom still existed. But it wasn't lonely anymore. It was supported. Supported freedom feels different in the body. Less restless. More intentional. Neuroscience calls this regulated autonomy, the ability to choose without stress overload. When stress drops, language improves. Always. Culturally, I also learned that commitment in America is verbalized repeatedly. Love isn't assumed. It's reaffirmed through conversation. That repetition felt strange at first. But repetition is how language solidifies. Marriage turned emotional repetition into linguistic reinforcement. One evening, my partner said, "Thank you for choosing us today." That sentence stayed with me. Choosing isn't a one-time event. It's daily. And daily choices require daily language. English stopped being an obstacle and became part of the choosing. If you're learning English and afraid that commitment to a routine, a relationship, a place will trap you, consider this. Commitment reduces noise. Noise is what overwhelms your brain. Reduced noise makes learning possible. Freedom without commitment scattered my attention. Commitment without freedom would have suffocated me. Together, they created focus. Focus gave my English direction. Direction gave it strength. I stopped asking, "Am I free enough?" I started asking, Am I clear enough? Clarity is freedom that others can understand. And understanding is what language is for. In the final part, I'll bring this story home. How love, language, freedom, and commitment came together in a not-so-perfect but deeply real ending, and why this journey was never about English alone. Not a fairy tale ending. People often expect stories like this to end with certainty. Fluent English. Perfect marriage. A clear lesson wrapped in hope. I used to want that kind of ending too. But life didn't offer it. And honestly, I'm glad it didn't. Because the truth I learned was quieter, deeper, and far more useful. There was no moment where I suddenly arrived. My English didn't click overnight. My marriage didn't become effortless. Instead, things softened. Gradually. Almost invisibly. One day, I realized I was no longer translating every sentence in my head. Another day, I noticed we argued less about misunderstanding and more about real differences. That's progress. Not perfection, progress. Fairy tales end with answers. Real life ends with better questions. The biggest shift wasn't linguistic. It was internal. I stopped measuring myself against an imagined finish line. Fluency stopped being a destination and became a relationship. Something I showed up for regularly, imperfectly, honestly. The same was true for love. I used to believe that love meant being understood without effort. That belief failed me in 2 countries and 2 languages. What I know now is simpler and harder. Love is the willingness to keep explaining yourself, and to keep listening when it would be easier to shut down. English became the training ground for that willingness. There were days when my sentences came out wrong and changed the mood of an entire evening. Days when I wished I could express nuance, but only had blunt tools. But those moments taught me something powerful. Clarity matters more than elegance. Saying the true thing plainly beats saying the beautiful thing vaguely. Marriage didn't require me to sound smart. It required me to be sincere. And sincerity simplified my English. Over time, my partner and I developed a rhythm. We learned each other's patterns, emotional triggers, and preferred words. Language stopped being a battlefield and became shared terrain. We didn't erase misunderstandings. We navigated them better. That's what maturity looks like, in both love and language. I also learned to forgive myself. For accents. For pauses. For mistakes that once felt humiliating. Shame is a terrible teacher. Compassion is a far better one. When I stopped judging my English, it improved. When I stopped judging myself as a partner, our relationship deepened. Psychologists talk about secure attachment. The feeling that you're safe to be imperfect. That safety is oxygen for growth. Without it, the brain stays defensive. With it, learning accelerates. I didn't find that safety in grammar books. I found it in conversations where I was allowed to be slow. If you're learning English through real life, through love, work, immigration, or survival, here's the truth nobody tells you: confusion is not failure. Confusion is evidence that you're stretching. Every misunderstanding you repair builds resilience. Every hard conversation you stay in builds fluency of character, not just language. The ending of this story isn't clean. We still misunderstand each other sometimes. I still search for words. Some days, English flows. Other days, it resists. But resistance doesn't scare me anymore. It means I'm still engaged. And that's the real ending. Not a fairy tale. Not a final chapter. Just continuity. I didn't learn English to sound like someone else. I learned it to tell my own story, haltingly, honestly, with an accent shaped by experience. That accent is part of the story now. So are the pauses. So are the imperfect sentences that carried real meaning when perfect ones were unavailable. Love didn't fix my English. English didn't save my marriage. But together, they taught me how to stay present when things are unclear. How to listen longer than is comfortable. How to choose clarity over pride. If there's one thing I hope you take from this journey, it's this: you don't need a perfect ending to be moving forward. You just need enough courage to keep speaking, and enough humility to keep listening. That's not a fairy tale. That's a life. Marriage isn't a fairy tale. And learning English isn't one either. But maybe, that's exactly why both are worth staying for. If you're still here, it means something in this story touched you. Maybe it was the loneliness of life in America. Maybe it was the arguments where the right words never came. Or maybe it was that quiet feeling of trying to learn English and wondering why it still feels so hard. You're not behind. You're just learning the real way. English doesn't grow in silence. Love doesn't survive without listening. And both take time, mistakes, and imperfect conversations. If you want to learn English through real stories, if you're looking for slow English listening, reading, and speaking practice that actually feels human, this channel was made for you. In the next videos, I'll keep sharing real English stories about life, marriage, family, and cultural differences in the United States. No textbooks, no pressure, just slow, clear American English you can understand and feel. Subscribe if you want to keep learning English naturally through stories. Like and share if you know someone who's learning English and feels close to giving up. And leave a comment. Which part of this story felt most real to you? This isn't a fairy tale. But if you stay, it might become your journey too. That's all for today. I'll be making more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to watch more.